Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. I think you're really going to enjoy today's presentation. It is as local history gets, and it is being done by one of our historians at the Eagle River Historical Society. Susan has been with us for many years and is deeply immersed in our institutional background and local history. She was one of the editors of what we call our big book, our big Eagle River history book, and she has contributed to our second publication of photographs. So you can count on getting well-researched material. So without further ado, help me welcome Susan Wilkinson.
My topic today is how the children of Old Eagle River spent their time. And these aren't just any children. This is my grandmother and her brother and her sister and my great-grandmother.
Susie?
Let's start by...
She had a question.
Can you give us their names?
They're all Cooks. Florence Percy Thompson Cook is the mother, and the young man is Mort Cook. The older of the two girls is Elida Cook Carter, and the younger one is Florence Cook. Florence Cook, help me. Resort Insaner. No.
Freyler.
No.
It'll get you. Keep going, I'll jump in.
My mother's favorite aunt. So today, first we're going to talk about the early schools, because everyone knows that children spend a great deal of time in the pursuit of knowledge. For information regarding early schools, I relied on the notes of Mae Wiegand Lawler and Emma Morgan Cook and Mort Cook. In the spring of 1884, people who had been here for about a year, and they had children and they were concerned about their children. They didn't want them hanging around downtown. Well, there was no downtown, but they didn't want them hanging around town with all these rough lumbermen who spoke crudely. It was just too dangerous. So they voted to start a school. And the first thing they had to do was find a location for the school. And there was a gentleman named, I'm sorry, I'm not going in order, so of course I can't find John O'Connor. And he was thought of as the father of Eagle River. His wife platted a good part of the original part of Eagle River. He had a lumber camp just on the north side of the Eagle River. And because he had a lumber camp, well, they were logging farther out on the river. But because he had lumbermen, he had to house them and feed them. And one of his buildings, one of the dorm, or the bunks, was suitable for school, sort of. It was 24 square feet, and you walk in and there were bunks on each wall. It was a nice square shape, and they thought they could make it a school by day and a bunkhouse by night. They made pine desks that were 12 to 16 feet wide, and they were slanted on both sides. This way they were 12 to 16, but here they were just 3 feet and they were slanted. And the kids sat on benches facing each other, as Mort Cook said, shin-kicking distance apart. Ann was the first teacher. Apparently, several of the boys in the class were difficult to manage, and Ann quit almost right away. The records show that there were a total of 5 teachers the first year, and they were all one after another. I can show you a picture of the first school. It's not a very good picture, but it's the best we've got. This is the shape of the building. Well, actually, it's on an angle, 24, 24. This was painted by Grant Cook, who was a step-brother of the children in the first slide. And for his 12th birthday, he was given oil paints, and he painted this picture on cardboard. And we believe it's somewhere at the museum. But it's he was recovering from illness, and he sat in the yard of his parents' home and did the painting. Even with the turnover of teachers and the semi-wild children, schooling was considered a success. The next year, a 2-room schoolhouse was built on the south side of the river on 1st Street. And it was, for old-timers, it was at the site of the old Gaffney Funeral Home in the middle of the block. That's where it was, Gaffney's was when I was a young girl. That was used for a couple of years. Then in 1890, this first real schoolhouse was built. The town board dedicated a whole block for the school, and it was bounded by, let's see, this is Spruce, 2nd Street, 3rd Street, and Division, and that whole block was designated as the school yard. It was considered to be the edge of town at the time. Nobody lived further. It's not like there was a great big forest, because the whole town was clear-cut, but it was the edge of town. This 2-story T-shaped room had T-shaped building had 4 schoolrooms, and you can see in the windows. They had a wood-burning furnace, and during the summer, the whole block was covered with wood piles in anticipation of needing the logs for the winter. The children didn't mind all the wood piles because it provided hiding places and places for them to climb. There was no grass and no trees, but the children had fun anyway. There was a whiteboard fence around the school. This is the actual school building would have been like back here. And this is the corner of 2nd and Division looking southwest. That turnstile was originally a gate, and there was no playground equipment, so the kids would swing back and forth on the gate until they broke it, of course. And then, rather than put another gate in, they put the logs kind of at different angles, and that would keep the cows and the pigs and the other farm animals out of the schoolyard because they couldn't navigate the route, but the children could. And so they started playing on the logs. This school burned in 1892. This is the Eagle River Elementary and High School, and this was in service from 1893 to 1923. In 1923, it was sometime before that, the original high school from over here was built. And then in 23, this was torn down, and the grade school that some of you went to was built on that land. On each floor, there were 3 good-sized classrooms, a large central hall, and cloakrooms. The library and the kindergarten were on the first floor, recitation and laboratory on the second floor, with front and rear stairs and a fire escape. The boys and girls privies were in the basement, so I guess you could say they had indoor plumbing. It had 3 large wood-burning furnaces, each served by a double flue chimney. One of the flues being for heat, and the other one being for ventilation. There was no city water, no electricity. Kerosene lamps were lit if it was too dark for the kids to see. There was a hand pump outside which furnished the water, and each room had a water pail and a dipper. My great-uncle, Pross Stein, graduated from this high school in 1915. He was the only male member of his graduating class. Even so, there was a football team. It's hard to believe, but that they could even find 11 players, but somehow they did. And then this is Pross Stein's quote. He was a member of the Historical Society in the 1960s, and I'm sure that he gave this as a presentation. It says, "We pitted our meager talents against Rhinelander and Minocqua, plus a game occasionally with Crandon if they could muster enough students for a team. We usually had to bring in aid from some prematurely husky 8th graders. We had to buy our own togs, shoes, ball, and other essentials, as well as keep up the local baseball diamond as a gridiron. We were given a room on the ground floor under the tower for a dressing and shower room. This made it quite handy for a shower, since we could borrow 2 large water pails from the janitor, which we filled from the pump outside the front entrance. After each game or practice session, one player threw 2 buckets of cold water, one on the front side and one on the back side, on another player, taking turns until all were clean." According to Mort Cook, the children used to build shacks in the woods during recess and the noon hour. In the winter, there was a long, narrow pond south and east where they rode on rafts. Did anybody go to school here? Does anybody remember there used to be a pond before, is it a Mason Hall? Off of Yellow Lake. Yeah, and that was one of the big ditches, really, was what they were. But the children skated there, and when either lunch or recess was over, the teachers signaled it was time to come back to school by lowering one corner of the Venetian blinds in the primary grade room. When these children of early Eagle River were not in school, how did they spend their time? I will concentrate on the Cook children, because Mort Cook wrote quite a bit about his childhood in his memoirs. But first I will start with Mort's parents. Lyman Joseph Cook, known as LJ, came to Eagle River in the spring of 1883 before the railroad. He traveled here from Norrie, Wisconsin, looking for a new location for the Dickinson and Cook General Store in Eagle River. So So here's Norrie. It's not too far from Wittenberg, although it's not on any of these big red roads. It's just one step above a dirt road. Like Eagle River, it was a lumber town, and it's pretty much a ghost town now, although there's a few people that live there. When he came the first time, LJ, the train only ran as far as Monaco, and there he boarded a work train as far as Gagen, which, anybody?
Gagan.
Harji.
Yeah.
And he walked the rest of the way, to Eagle River, but it was just him, and there were railroad crews all along the route because they were bringing the railroad to Eagle River, and they were halfway to Three Lakes when he came the first time. When he arrived, he met two early settlers, Finn Lawler and C.L. Perry, and they lived at the foot of Yellow Birch Lake, about where the driveway entrance to the country club is. And Finn Lawler took LJ up the lakes in a birch bark canoe. It wasn't as navigable as it is now because there were no dams. The water was very shallow in a lot of places. But they went down the river, I don't know how far. But when LJ returned to Norrie, he had a glowing report, and he and his partner, George Dickinson, began planning the move. About a month later, LJ came back to Eagle River with crates of general merchandise, drugs, and patent medicines. By then, a month later, the rails were laid as far north as Three Lakes. So the balance of the journey was made not on foot because he had all this inventory for his new store. They were in carts pulled by oxen. LJ and his partner set up a store and a tent on the north side of the river. At that time, there was not much here except Bradford and Tamling's lumber camp, located close to Crystal Springs Resort, the faded red boathouse right near downtown. And then also, there was a railroad construction camp where Riverstone Building is. I should say that his partner, Dickinson, he's the one that built the white spruce, and he and his family lived in it. The white spruce, I'm sure everybody knows, is now a restaurant. So because LJ carried a stock of medicines, the Native Americans and the lumberjacks thought of him as a doctor. There were no doctors here, so he was the best they had, and he sewed up knife wounds, and he amputated frozen toes and fingers, and he occasionally pulled teeth, for which he received 25 cents per tooth. Mort's mother, Florence Thompson Cook, was one of 11 children, and the family lived in Maine, and they weren't very well off. And when her father died quite young, some of the younger children were bound out or indentured. That included Florence and her sister Sabrina. Sabrina was later Mrs. G.M. Nash, Gould Nash of Eagle River, so the sister came here later too. Some of the older Thompson siblings had come to Wisconsin to find farmland, and they were not too far from Norrie. In 1883, not long after she and her sister Sabrina arrived in Wisconsin, Florence married L.J. Cook. He was a widower with 2 children, Grant and Jay, and they were 11 and 9 years old. 5 children were born to them after they moved to Eagle River. Paul was the first Caucasian boy born in Eagle River. Lawrence was the next one, but he died at the age of 6. Morton came next, my grandmother Elida and her sister Florence. Here are some excerpts from the memoirs of Mort Cook. I was born in Eagle River, February 24th, 1887, during President Harrison's administration. My memory goes back to about 1892-93. Our house was located on the north side of the river and just west of the railroad bridge. Eagle River was a booming lumber town then. The river was a big thing in our lives. We were either by it, in it, or on it most of the time. We all became expert at handling a boat or a birch bark canoe. We boys became good swimmers at an early age. The river was usually full of floating logs, and as we developed enough nimbleness in our feet, we had lots of fun running all over the river on these logs. We would pause to regain our breath on a big log and sometimes receive a dunking if we misjudged the buoyancy of a small log. My sister Elida ran logs with us. Being much lighter in weight than us boys, she could go places on the small logs that we couldn't. She never took a dunking, which was a good thing, as very few girls learned to swim. Propriety demanded that girls wear as much or more clothing in the water than out of the water. My sisters never learned to swim. Directly west of our house, a couple of 100 feet, was the abandoned O'Connor lumber camp, including the building that served as Eagle River's first school and church. North and west of our house was a hemlock and cedar swamp with an abandoned beaver pond on it. One of my early adventures started there. I was about 3 1/2, 4 years old when I ventured out there to pick blueberries. I was soon back home reporting that a big black dog was out there, and when I walked over to pet it, it growled at me. It scared me and I ran home. Of course my folks knew that it was a bear I saw. The bear probably left the berry patch the same time I did. Nevertheless, all this made quite an impression on me. There was a lot of excitement and bustle as they organized a hunting party. The next day, I took my brother Paul's cap gun and started out on a bear hunt of my own. I went beyond the old camp buildings and followed an old logging road about a 1/2 mile. This took me to Kinney's homestead land. Mr. Kinney and his son Ellsworth were out looking for a stray cow when they met a small boy carrying a cat pistol. They asked me what I was doing out in the woods, and I said I was hunting a bear. They had no idea who I was, so they took me to their house, and Mrs. Kinney gave me a glass of milk and the biggest cookie I ever saw. In the meantime, Ellsworth made a trip to town to find out who was short one small boy. When he reached the bridge, he noticed a whole fleet of boats and many people strung out along the shore. Upon inquiry, he was told that Cook's little boy was missing and that they were about to drag the river. The party soon broke up when Ellsworth told them about the boy that he had found in the woods. Not long after the bear hunt, a circus came to town. They set up their tents where the city park is, Riverview Park. Paul and I, my brother Paul and I, watched the activities from our front porch. My very religious mother didn't think a circus was the proper entertainment for children. So in the afternoon, she had Brother Grant take my brother Paul on a boat ride to get him out of the house. was too young for either the boat ride or the circus, so I stayed at home. Soon a large crowd started gathering in front of the circus, and a band started playing. I decided to go to the circus. While Mother thought I was busy playing in the sand, I left home, crossed the bridge, and joined the crowd. I was turned back at the gate, but some lumberjack picked me up and said I was going in with him. He bought me peanuts, lemonade, popcorn, and took me to see the sideshow and the main show. When we came out, my dad was waiting for me at the gate. I can't recall any punishment, nor the name of my host. I do recall spending a lot of time tied to the clothesline after that adventure. I would like to tell something about a self-adopted member of our family. She was a young lady of German descent, though she told us kids she was Irish. She made her home with us when we were very young. She helped with the housework, took care of the kids, and we all worshipped her. She made our mother's work a lot easier. I don't believe she ever received wages while she lived with us. However, I do know that my dad gave her money from time to time for clothes and spending. No one had or spent much money in those days. There was a lot of barter. My oldest brother, Grant, was rather prim, and Edith loved to do things to upset his dignity. She mismatched his socks. She sewed bright-colored pockets on the back of his nightgown. On several occasions, when he took out his handkerchief in church, various objects such as poker chips and playing cards fell to the floor. Edith had quite a few gentlemen admirers. The one I liked best was Billy Walsh. He owned a store and never failed to visit with me and give me a piece of candy when I went to deliver a note from Edith. Edith left our home to start a home of her own when she married Billy Walsh. My brother Paul and his friends, Dent Dickinson and Finn Perry, and I used to play near the beaver pond. We built a log shanty there, and sometimes our folks would let us sleep in it. One day we built a raft. There did not seem to be room on it for me, the youngest of the raft builders. I went home and got the top off an old round-top trunk and dragged it back to the pond. It made an excellent boat for me as it was covered with zinc and was watertight. The best feature of it was that it lacked the necessary buoyancy to support any of the others. I had it all to myself. I had lots of fun paddling it around the pond. Then I got the idea I could have more fun on larger waters. So I dragged it back home and down to the river. Unfortunately, my dad saw me as I was about to launch my craft. He vetoed the plan, as he didn't think a 6-year-old boy had any business alone on the river. Shortly after that, my boat disappeared. Chores took a significant part of my time. Almost everyone in those days had horses, cows, chickens, and sometimes pigs to take care of. In the winter, it was sawing and carrying in wood, and in the summer, it was the garden. However, our work made us appreciate our spare time and added spice to our play. Fishing was always fun, and it added tasty food to the table, although I don't remember getting much fun out of the cleaning of the fish. We played baseball, leapfrog, duck on a rock, red line, and other games. None of our games required any equipment except a 5-cent ball of twine to wind into a baseball. Today it seems that kids can't play any games without first investing a couple of $100s in equipment. He wrote this in the late 1960s, the early 1970s. Picnics were a big thing in those days. The 4th of July was the summer event. The day started with the loud boom of Mr. Oberholzer's cannon. At 5 a.m., it rattled all the windows in town and shook some of the houses. Then would come the shooting of firecrackers by the kids. At 9, the program would start downtown. First a parade, then the reading of the Declaration of Independence and speeches, then races and other contests. This is Mort Cook, but he was 28 at this time. This is 1917. We don't have any photographs of the 4th of July parades in the 1890s. This gentleman in the center with the white hat is my grandpa, Judge Carter. The town was well decorated with buntings and large balsam trees. Planted along Railroad Street and on both sides of Wall Street. The trees were brought in for the occasion. There was scarcely a live tree in the whole town. I don't know if they were in pots and they got carried away after. I don't know. James Oberholzer was always marshal of the day. What a handsome figure he was. He rode a black horse and dressed in his Civil War Army uniform with plumed hat, sword, and pistol. You can just imagine how that would appeal to a little boy. One of the races I will never forget as long as I live. It was supposed to be a fat man's race, but they couldn't find anyone to compete. So they got Bob Hayes, a wizened little old man, to run against Art Matthews, a big burly lumberjack. Some of the promoters talked Matthews into lowering his suspenders so he would have good shoulder action. They told him Hayes was very fast on his feet. The race started. Matthews had a big lead when the top button on his pants gave way and his pants dropped to his ankle. Matthews went sprawling into the dust. The effect was amusing to some, startling to others, as Matthews didn't wear underwear. Hayes was so convulsed with laughter that he couldn't finish the race. Matthews picked himself and his pants up and won the race. He pocketed the prize money and left town for a few weeks. 4th of July afternoons were usually taken up by a ball game, or in the evening there were concerts and fireworks. One year they thought the fireworks would be more spectacular if they were fired from the top of the bridge truss. So they laid wood as a platform on the very top, and the fireworks were hoisted up. Things went well for about a minute until a pinwheel came off its mounting, fell on a heap of fireworks, and ignited them. Rockets and Roman candles started going in every direction as the men started scrambling down from their high perch. One man, braver than the others, or more foolish, stayed up on the platform and kicked the whole mess into the river. That ended the celebration for the night. All the towns around here have a story of that happening. I remember when I was little, Phelps had all of the fireworks on a wooden raft in the middle of Big Twin, and they all went up at once. It was disappointing for a kid, even though that one piece of fireworks was spectacular. The next morning, my brothers Jay and Grant went down to the river, fished the fireworks out of the water, dried them for a couple of weeks, and then we had a post-4th of July celebration. Okay, I have an opportunity for extra credit. Does anyone know what this sign on the bridge says? You can't say veto. The sign says, $5 fine for driving across the bridge faster than you can walk. In the early 1890s, during Grover Cleveland's administration, there was a depression and the lumber market failed. One year during these hard times, the town authorities decided they could not afford a 4th of July celebration. A group of young people got together and organized a ragamuffin parade. They got a hold of a horse and a wagon and posted signs on it stating that the town was too poor to give the kids a celebration. They got a large gang of kids dressed in rags and marched through town. The businessmen decided that they couldn't let the kids down, so they hurriedly organized a celebration. Okay, this is Mort is standing, his little sister Florence is next to him, Paul is in the middle. My grandmother is to the left in the light-colored coat, and the other three I don't know, but they might be Thompson cousins, I don't know. My swimming ability saved my life on my 10th birthday. I was sliding downhill when my sled broke through the ice, through the snow crust, and I suddenly found myself in the water under the ice. The river current had worn away the ice in that spot, leaving a crust of snow to hide the potential death trap. It was pitch dark under the ice, but I could see a light shining through the hole I had made. It didn't take me long to swim back to the hole, and after breaking some of the ice, I was able to scramble up onto the ice. No one saw me, so it was lucky I was able to get out alone. The next month, on March 24th, 1899, at the age of 35, my mother died. As I grew older, I often wondered if worry over our many adventures and escapades had anything to do with her early death. Our dad was desperate for a combination housekeeper and someone to watch the children. So he went to Tomahawk and made a deal with an aunt and uncle to come and live with us. They were very religious and would not allow us to play on Sunday or even read unless it was the Bible or our Sunday school papers. Brother Paul thought up the idea of playing church. Our uncle approved of that, so we moved the family organ away from the wall and put a chair behind it. Paul was the preacher. He stood on the chair, dressed in Dad's swallowtail coat, and used the top of the organ for his pulpit. One of the children was the organist. The rest of us were the congregation. Our church service soon grew attractive enough to draw the neighborhood kids. Some of those that attended were Grace and Ruby Radcliffe, Ella Esther and Bill Thompson, Raleigh Dent and John Dickinson, Maud and Ida Patton, Henry Oberholzer, and Finn Perry. Paul was able to put on a pretty good imitation of a camp meeting preacher. He would line up the songs for us to sing and had some uncouth parodies for some of the hymns. He would have us come up front to confess and repent some imaginary sin and then tell us we were forgiven. Every 5 minutes or so, he would have someone take up a collection. I remember our uncle used to occasionally look in on our services with a doubtful expression. He did not approve, but he hated to interfere with something that had at least a resemblance to church. One Sunday, he suggested it was such a nice day, why not play outdoors? We welcomed this suggestion as we were beginning to get bored with church play. That was the end of our Sunday restrictions, and our lives came back to normal. No one had or needed much money in those days, but it came in handy just the same. If you were lucky, you had skates or a sled. Most of the boys managed to secure a few marbles. When we were very young, we had to depend on the pennies our parents handed out from time to time. As we grew older, the need for pocket money only increased, and I was always on the alert to pick up loose change. 4th of July and Christmas were the times when I really felt the pinch of poverty. The older boys sometimes made money by collecting whiskey bottles and selling them back to the saloons. They received 1 cent each for each half-pint bottle, 2 cents for pints, and a nickel for quarts. My cousin Bill Thompson and I tried the bottle business. By the time I was 8 years old, my earning capacity increased, as did my needs. I caught an occasional walleye and sold it for 5 cents. I picked blueberries in the swamp and currants in our garden and sold them for 3 cents a quart. My dad sometimes let me sell surplus from his garden, and I recall selling huge cabbages for a nickel. About that time, Norman Kinney, from my bear hunting days, started employing me. I would ride his skinny old horse as it pulled a cultivator between rolls of corn and potatoes. For the day's work, he paid me 10 cents. At the end of the day, my bottom and my legs were so lame, I could hardly walk. I thought Mr. Kinney was awful stingy to expect so much work for so little pay. But he was the only one I knew of who hired young boys, so I kept going back for more. When I was about 12 years old, I started earning 25 cents a week. Dad hired a new housekeeper, Nancy Brown. She had a young daughter to support, and she offered to do the family washing for an additional amount every week. I was to get 25 cents a week for helping. My job was to pump the wash water the night before and to turn the washing and the, what do you call it, turn the washing machine and wringer the next morning. I had to pump enough water to fill the wash boiler, 2 tubs, and a 40-gallon barrel. Nancy took an unholy pleasure in getting her wash on the line before any of the neighbors. This meant getting up at 4 in the morning. I had a hard time keeping awake in school on wash days. The same year, I bought some traps with my wash money, and in the fall and spring, I ran a line of traps on the river from our property to the dam. An old man, Hank Vervey, who was a friend of Finn Lawler and my father's, was trapping at the same time and place. He taught me a lot about setting traps and skinning animals. I sold over $30 worth of furs. Later, I realized that some of the muskrats and the mink I found in my traps were put there by my friend Hank. Brother Paul was hired quite often by the Fred Burdell family. They were the rich people in town. Who knew? I can't remember what Elida and Florence did for money, except they dug and sold worms. Elida started giving music lessons in her early teens, and soon after, she and Paul started a dance orchestra that operated successfully for 5 or 6 years. When they reached high school age, my sister Florence and her friend Agnes Gander each received $1 a week, singing between reel changes in the movie theater. John Harris of Antico used to come once a week and show movies at Cooney's Rink. This was a few years later. The Lyceum Opera House was above Morgan's Groceries, which was on the corner. What is it now? Anything? Is it T-shirts?
T-shirts, yes.
T-shirt
Wall and
place.
Railroad.
It's on the corner of Wall and Railroad. So this ends the memoirs of Mort Cook. He attended Eagle River Elementary and High School from kindergarten on and graduated in 1908. He passed the state teacher's course and taught first in St. Germain and later in Conover at Mannheim School, where he met his future wife, Jenny Lilrose. Mort was hired by Strong and Manley Hardware Store in 1912 as an express agent. The store was also a Ford franchise. Automobiles were assembled at the factory, then broken down into components and reassembled. Where are they? I thought I had two. Okay. I couldn't find a picture to show you, but this was in our history book. I would just pass them back after you look at them. Mort was promoted from agent to reassembler of the cars. In the early day, his shop was on the second floor. An elaborate ramp system, which you see in the pictures, was necessary to get the reassembled car to street level. In March of 1918, Mort left for San Antonio, Texas, where he did a stint in the Army as a mechanic in the aviation department. This was a notice that he put in the Eagle River newspaper. I leave Thursday to join the aviation section at Kelly Field, San Antonio, Texas, as motor mechanic, and my repair shop and garage will be closed until we have licked the Kaiser. Oh, wow. Frank W. Carter, his brother-in-law, will have charge of customers' work, now in the shop awaiting delivery. So long, everybody. Mort enlisted February 24th, 1918, and he was discharged August 18th, 1918, when he licked the Kaiser. When he returned to Eagle River, after World War I, he was named head of the auto department. He was involved in the planning of the new Ford garage building constructed on the corner of Main and Division. And of course, it's still there. He was named foreman in 1922 when it opened. In 1940, after 27 years with Strong and Manley, Mort retired. And a few years later, the Ford franchise was sold to Percy Rosemurgy, whose employee, Michael Brodovich, bought the dealership from Rosemurgy. Mort, meanwhile, became the engineer and custodian with the Eagle River school system. In his 70s, he retired again, but he never lost interest in mechanics and continued working on projects in his basement workshop. Mort Cook died in 1986, so he was 97 years old, and was remembered fondly by many people in Eagle River. We are all indebted to him for taking the time to write down his memories of early Eagle River. You can read the many pages of his memoir at the museum on Highway 45 South. Any questions?
What if I done something for you?
I have a question. That red building that looks like a schoolhouse that's on Wall Street, right when you...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, was that originally a schoolhouse?
Where is it?
It's like
Yes, it was the Lincoln
Cleveland
School.
Daycare. Which one?
The Lincoln School.
Lincoln School?
It was one of the country schools, because that was way out of town. That's a mile.
What building?
I really want to see that building. I want to go in there and see what it looks like.
Just
Oh,
before my
okay,
hour.
okay, so it used to be like in town hall at one time.
Yeah.
Okay.
People that were owned during the glass, and so they're remodeling and they're gonna have a glass business, tile business on there now.
So it'll be open?
Yeah.
So they probably will.
What did you say?
informed question, but so at the time that Mort was growing up, how many children were there actually in Eagle River to attend this school?
Well, go back early on,
Because that was massive.
that's 1890.
Yeah.
And nobody lived here until 1883.
Okay.
So that might have been 7 to 9 years later. But Eagle River was experiencing a growth period because of the lumber and the sawmills. There was, it wasn't always like this. Once all the logs were cut, people moved on.
Could it be
Until
that,
somebody decided to make money from the natural resources.
as I can see, there are people standing there and people eating out the windows, that'd be a picture of the whole school population, do you think?
Could be, yeah.
Do they,
Picture it.
do they like stay there overnight? Did they say, I mean, was it like a dorm room? Or was it? Like
No, that was just a school.
Just a school.
Yeah.
'Cause it is a
There
big
were
school.
if you lived in Saint Germain, which was called what? Something else. Whatever it was called. They had their own school there. Mannheim isn't that far away. You know where Mannheim Road goes off of 17? It's probably 10 miles from here.
Chicago Avenue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
There was easily 30 or more because I was researching it for Karen, and I have 2 tubs of a file for each school.
yeah.
There were just dozens and dozens of schools.
But it's
They were
just,
small.
that's just so counter to what I would have thought of this era, so it's very interesting.
But if you lived out in Howard, you wouldn't have wanted to try to ship your kid
Of course.
by horse or cart to town. So you had something,
You didn't
Down
have
the
an
road.
extra horse.
yeah, you kept it local.
Vito.
Well, and I would say in addition to that is at a certain age, some people stop going to school because they have to work in the field. So it's not uncommon for people to stop at what we would consider 8th grade, or maybe even earlier, depending on A, if they can afford it, B, if they had a farm or something else. So the population kind of shifts in its range quite a bit.
That's
Also, just as an aside, Mort's older stepbrother, Grant Cook, when he grew up, became the Vilas County Superintendent of Schools. And I know my grandmother was hoping to go off to music school after graduation from high school. He collared her and made her teach for a semester until they could find a replacement for one of the schools.